For most of human history, work had a human scale. Hands shaped wood. Hands spun thread. Hands learned, repeated, and aged with the craft they carried. For thousands of years, the rhythm of life was slow, predictable, and bound to nature. The sun marked the beginning of labor. The night marked its end. Energy came from muscles, animals, flowing water, or the passing wind. Then, in the 1800s, that rhythm broke. In dark brick buildings filled with steam and noise, human hands were no longer the center of production. They became attendants, supervisors, replaceable parts. Iron arms turned faster than flesh ever could. Machines worked without fatigue, without memory, without pause. And for the first time, productivity was no longer limited by the human body. This transformation did not announce itself with a single invention. It unfolded quietly, one workshop at a time, one displaced worker at a time. In places like Manchester, entire populations were pulled from fields and villages into factories where time was measured not by seasons, but by clocks. Children learned the rhythm of machines before they learned how to read. Men and women adjusted their lives to gears, belts, and endless repetition. What was gained was efficiency. What was lost was something harder to measure. This was not just the birth of modern industry. It was the moment human labor was redefined. When skill gave way to speed. When endurance mattered more than mastery. When the value of a person became tied to the output of a machine. This is the story of that moment. When machines replaced human hands and the modern world quietly began. If you're enjoying this journey through time, remember to like the video and tell us in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? Before machines learned to work, work had a face. It had names, habits, and limits. For centuries, production followed the human body. A day of labor ended when muscles failed or light disappeared. Skill was learned slowly, passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. A craft was not just a job, it was an identity. In villages scattered across Britain, families worked inside their own homes. A single room could be a workshop, a kitchen, and a classroom at once. Wool was spun beside the fire. Thread was woven on wooden looms that creaked with familiarity. Children learned by watching. Parents worked at a pace set not by demand, but by endurance. Time was uneven, but it was human. Energy too had limits. A river could turn a wheel, but only where it flowed. Wind could power a sail, but only when it blew. Animals could pull and carry, but only until exhaustion. The world before machines was constrained by nature, and for thousands of years, that constraint shaped civilization itself. In 1700, a merchant in England lived in a world not so different from one in ancient Rome. Goods were scarce. Transportation was slow. Production was local. Most people consumed what they or their neighbors produced. But beneath this familiar rhythm, pressure was building. Britain's population was growing. Cities were expanding. Demand for goods, especially textiles, was rising faster than traditional systems could supply. Cotton, once a luxury imported from distant lands, was becoming a necessity. Light, washable, and versatile, it fit perfectly with changing tastes. But producing cotton cloth by hand was slow and expensive. Spinners and weavers could not keep pace with demand. This imbalance created tension. In the countryside, work was plentiful but poorly paid. In towns, opportunities existed, but infrastructure lagged behind. Roads were muddy. Transport was unreliable. Markets were fragmented. Yet Britain possessed something few other societies had in such abundance: coal. Beneath its soil lay the compressed energy of ancient forests, stored over millions of years. For centuries, coal had been used cautiously, mostly for heating. Its potential was known, but not yet unleashed. At the same time, Britain was experiencing a quiet transformation in thought. The scientific revolution of the previous century had normalized experimentation. Failure was no longer shameful. It was data. Inventors, tinkerers, and entrepreneurs began asking a new kind of question. Not how to improve the worker, but how to replace the work. This was not driven by cruelty, it was driven by arithmetic. Human labor was expensive, coal was cheap, and machines, once built, did not sleep. Slowly, almost invisibly, the logic of production began to change. The old system, known as the domestic or putting out system, stretched to its limits. Merchants supplied raw materials to households. Finished goods were collected weeks later. Delays were common. Quality varied. Control was weak. What followed was not a sudden revolution, but a series of small solutions to practical problems. Each invention solved a bottleneck. Each improvement increased speed. And with every gain in efficiency, the balance between human hands and mechanical force shifted. By the end of the 18th century, the world still looked familiar. Fields were green, villages were quiet. Church bells still marked the hours. But something fundamental had changed. For the first time in history, humanity was on the verge of breaking free from the limits of muscle, wind, and water. The machines were not yet dominant, but they were learning. And once they did, the old rhythm would never return. By the early decades of the 1800s, the question was no longer whether machines could assist human labor. That question had already been answered. The new question was simpler and far more unsettling. How fast could a machine work? And how little human presence did it require? Inside the factories of the 19th century, speed became the supreme value. Not quality, not tradition, not mastery, speed. Machines did not learn through years of repetition. They did not improve through experience. They improved through replacement. A faster loom replaced a slower one. A stronger engine replaced a weaker one. And quietly, a cheaper worker replaced a skilled craftsman. In the old world, skill had been scarce. A master weaver was valuable because he could not be easily replaced. His hands carried knowledge that machines did not yet possess. But in the factories of the 1800s, knowledge was transferred from hands to mechanisms. Once that transfer was complete, the human operator became secondary. The power loom did not need to understand cloth. It only needed to move. The steam engine did not care about fatigue. It only demanded fuel. Production was no longer limited by what a human could endure. It was limited only by coal, iron, and maintenance. Inside these buildings, a new discipline emerged. The clock replaced the sun. The whistle replaced the church bell. Time was divided into shifts, measured in minutes, enforced with penalties. A late worker was not just irresponsible, he disrupted the machine. This was the great inversion of the 19th century. Humans no longer dictated the rhythm of work. They adapted themselves to it. Factories were designed around machines, not people. Ceilings rose to accommodate belts and shafts. Floors vibrated with constant motion. Noise became permanent. Conversation disappeared. Silence was replaced by mechanical thunder. In this environment, skill lost its meaning. A child could be taught to tie broken threads. A woman could be trained to monitor multiple spindles. A man could feed coal into a furnace for 12 hours without understanding the machine he served. What mattered was obedience, consistency, endurance. For factory owners, this was efficiency perfected. Labor became predictable. Output became measurable. Costs became controllable. For workers, it was disorientation. The old pride of making something from start to finish vanished. No one owned the product of their labor. No one even saw it completed. Work was fragmented into endless repetition. The same motion, the same task, thousands of times a day. In industrial cities like Lowell, purpose-built for mechanized production, entire communities were organized around factory schedules. Housing, meals, sleep, all revolved around the demands of machines. The body adapted, but at a cost. Hands developed repetitive injuries, lungs filled with dust and fibers, hearing dulled under constant noise. Yet the system expanded relentlessly, because machines delivered what the market demanded: cheap goods in vast quantities. Cloth that once took weeks to produce could now be made in hours. Prices fell. Consumption rose. and society made a collective decision. It accepted the trade. Speed over skill, quantity over craftsmanship, mechanism over mastery. By mid-century, the replacement was no longer controversial. It was normal. Children entered factories knowing no other world. Cities grew around chimneys and rail lines. The mechanical rhythm became the background noise of daily life. The machine was no longer an intruder. It was the environment. And in the 1800s, once speed became more valuable than skill, the transformation was irreversible. The human hand did not disappear, but it was no longer central. It had been replaced. In the 19th century, time itself was re-engineered. For most of human history, time had been flexible. Work expanded and contracted with daylight. Seasons dictated effort. Rest was irregular, but natural. The factory erased that logic. Inside industrial buildings, time became rigid, measurable, absolute. A clock hung on the wall, indifferent to fatigue or hunger. Its hands moved forward, whether the body could follow or not. The working day was no longer a shared understanding. It was a contract enforced by bells, whistles, and fines. 12 hours, 14 hours, 6 days a week. The machine did not slow down, so neither could the worker. In the textile mills of industrial Britain, the workday often began before sunrise. Men, women, and children walked through dark streets toward glowing factory windows. Inside, gas lamps burned long after the sun had set. Night and day lost their meaning. Meals were taken quickly, often beside machines. Breaks were timed, monitored, reduced. Even bodily needs were regulated by production schedules. This new discipline reshaped the human body. Posture changed. Movements became repetitive. Endurance mattered more than strength. Children were especially vulnerable. Their small bodies fit easily beneath machinery. Their fingers were quick. Their wages were low. In many factories, children made up a significant portion of the workforce, not because they were uniquely skilled, but because machines had reduced work to tasks almost anyone could perform. The factory did not require experience. It required compliance. By the mid-1800s, industrial cities were filled with people whose entire lives revolved around mechanical schedules. Sleep, meals, family life, all were secondary. Home was no longer a place of production. It was a place of recovery. Housing expanded rapidly but without planning. Rows of narrow dwellings appeared near factories, built quickly and cheaply. Overcrowding was common. Clean water was rare. Disease spread easily. Cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis. Life expectancy in many industrial districts fell sharply. In some neighborhoods, half of all children died before reaching adulthood. Observers were disturbed by what they saw. One of them was Friedrich Engels, who walked the streets of industrial cities and described environments shaped entirely by production. He saw rivers turned into waste channels, air thick with smoke. Neighborhoods built not for living, but for labor storage. The environment itself bore the marks of mechanization. Trees disappeared. Canals darkened with runoff. The sky above industrial centers rarely cleared. Yet this world persisted and expanded because it worked. Factories delivered goods faster and cheaper than any system before them. Markets grew. Trade intensified. And gradually, society adapted to the new measurement of life. Watches became common, schedules standardized, railway timetables synchronized entire regions. Time was no longer personal. It was shared, external, enforced. For workers, resistance was limited. Missing a shift meant losing wages. Losing wages meant hunger, and hunger enforced discipline more effectively than any overseer. Still, something fundamental had shifted. Work was no longer something woven into life. Life was now organized around work. The machine did not just replace the human hand, it restructured the human day. By the middle of the 19th century, this rhythm felt inevitable. Children were born into it. Cities were built for it. The factory clock became the heartbeat of modern society. And once time itself had been mechanized, there was no returning to the seasons. By the middle of the 1800s, the logic of machines had proven its power. Production soared. Costs fell. cities expanded. But beneath these gains, a quieter reckoning was unfolding. Mechanical efficiency did not eliminate human labor. It redefined its value. In the factory system, a worker was no longer measured by knowledge or creativity. He was measured by output, by punctuality, by endurance. In this new order, people became variables. If one worker failed, another could be found. If wages were too high, they could be lowered. If resistance appeared, the machine would continue regardless. For many, this realization was devastating. Skilled artisans, weavers, spinners, metalworkers watched their trades disappear within a generation. Years of mastery became economically meaningless. Their hands still remembered what to do. The market no longer cared. This sense of dispossession fueled anger. In industrial districts, groups of workers began to act. They did not attack owners or governments at first. They attacked machines. The Luddite movement was not driven by ignorance of technology, but by fear of erasure. Machines were symbols. They represented the end of a way of life. Factories were broken into at night. Frames were smashed, looms destroyed. The response was swift and unforgiving. The state protected machinery with soldiers. Machine breaking became a capital crime. The new system would not be negotiated away. Order was restored, but the tension remained. Inside factories, discipline hardened. Supervisors enforced rules with fines and dismissal. Accidents were common. Compensation was rare. A slipped hand could mean permanent injury. A moment of inattention could mean death. Yet work continued, because survival depended on it. Outside the factory walls, the environment absorbed the cost. Smoke darkened the sky. Coal dust settled on homes and lungs. Rivers carried waste away from production sites and into living spaces. For the first time in history, entire populations lived inside landscapes shaped primarily by industry. Nature was no longer a backdrop. It was a resource to be consumed and a sink for waste. At the same time, a new social divide was becoming visible. Above the factory floors lived owners, managers, engineers. They inhabited cleaner neighborhoods. Their homes were filled with goods produced by the very system below them. A middle class emerged, clerks, foremen, technicians, whose livelihoods depended on the smooth functioning of machines, but who did not operate them directly. This division reshaped society. Workplace hierarchy became rigid. Social mobility narrowed. The distance between those who controlled machines and those who served them grew wider. And yet, despite everything, resistance slowly evolved. Workers began to organize, not against machines themselves, but against conditions. Early trade unions formed, often illegally. Strikes disrupted production. For the first time, labor began to negotiate collectively with capital. Governments, pressured by unrest and reformers, responded cautiously. Factory acts were introduced. Working hours for children were limited. Safety regulations appeared, unevenly enforced. These changes did not reverse mechanization. They acknowledged its permanence. By the late 1800s, society had accepted a difficult truth. Machines were not leaving. The factory system was not temporary. Human life would have to be reshaped around it. The human cost of mechanical efficiency had been paid, not once, but continuously. In bodies worn down, in landscapes altered, in communities transformed. And still, the system pressed forward, because the world it was creating had become impossible to imagine without it. By the end of the 19th century, the replacement was complete. Factories no longer felt new. Smoke no longer shocked. The noise of machinery faded into the background of everyday life. A generation had grown up knowing no other rhythm. Children born in the 1870s entered a world already shaped by machines. They did not remember hand looms or seasonal labor. For them, work had always meant schedules, wages, and factory walls. Mechanization had moved beyond textiles. Ironworks, shipyards, mines, and railways all followed the same logic. Human hands were still present, but they no longer defined the process, they serviced it. By the 1890s, electricity began to replace steam in some factories, increasing speed and precision even further. Production became cleaner, brighter, more controlled. The machine grew quieter and more absolute. Society adjusted accordingly. Education shifted toward discipline and punctuality. Cities expanded vertically and outward. Consumption became a central feature of life. The world created by machines was efficient, abundant, and relentless. And with each improvement, distance grew between the act of making and the person consuming. Objects appeared in shops without visible origin. Labor became abstract. By the close of the 1800s, the question was no longer whether machines had replaced human hands. That had already happened. The deeper question was what humanity would become in a world where its oldest role, the maker, was no longer central. The 19th century ended without answering it, but the machine-made world it left behind ensured the question would never disappear. The 19th century did not set out to erase the human hand. It followed the logic of efficiency, scale, and progress. What emerged was a world faster than any before it, and more distant from the people who built it. The machines of the 1800s did more than transform production. They reshaped time, labor, cities, and expectations. They taught humanity to live by schedules instead of seasons, by output instead of craft. That inheritance surrounds us still, in the speed of our lives, in the systems we rarely question, in the quiet assumption that the world must always move faster. Old world view exists to slow that movement, just enough to look back, to trace the origins of the world we inhabit, and to remember that every system, no matter how permanent it seems, was once a choice. If this story added depth to your understanding of the modern world, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who values history, because the past is never truly gone. It is still working, through us.